Welcome to another exciting week of Kevjet, the podcast.
It's a good news story. It's a perfect place to be in my world right now. It's all good.
This week's guest is retired RCMP officer Brigdit Leger.
When I got the call, I went, man, I gotta think about this. Like, as crazy as my life was, working shift work and having a 2 and a 4-year-old, this opportunity felt really right at this particular time.
She tells us what lifelong lessons she learned while living in the Arctic.
It's all fuckery. You don't need any of it. So live slim, keep your life simple. You don't need all that shit.
I ask the hard-hitting questions that hit you right in the feels.
Oh boy, you're just going right for the jugular, aren't you?
She tells us about her mission in the Ukraine and how she was evac'd out.
I was happy that I entered Ukraine at the time that I did because it was an evolving and it was a police force that was transforming itself.
We discuss who her favorite VIPs were.
Lizzie and I are old friends. I had the opportunity to work a VIP detail with Queen Elizabeth when she was visiting Nova Scotia.
I hope you enjoy my conversation with Brigdit Leger. Welcome to Kevjet, the podcast, Brigdit Leger.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to this conversation.
You look forward to it. I fear it. So I guess it's kind of the same. I don't know.
We've kind of had a few mock discussions and they've kind of gone really well, but we've always kind of said, well, we'll see how it goes, but we've made it happen. So we're going to see how it goes for real.
Absolutely. That's great.
Cool. So Brigdit, you are a retired RCMP officer.
I am. I spent 34 years in the force with the RCMP here in Canada. I had a number of adventures right throughout. And during that time, I happened to meet some amazing people, of which, of course, is you and your entire family, who I'm very pleased to be able to still call friends. And after 34 years, I retired last October, so October 2022. And since that time, I stayed with the force in the capacity of a reservist. So basically, I'm still working part-time.
So you're not going to sit at home and knit.
I have learned a lot about myself in the last year, one of which is I am absolutely not ready to sit home and play nice. Furthermore, I absolutely love to travel. So working part-time certainly makes that travel more affordable and opens up the door to some amazing adventures, of which you have been a number of.
Definitely. There's lots of future plans.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a good news story. It's a perfect place to be in my world right now. It's all good.
Amazing. Why don't we start off with you growing up in Newfoundland and what enticed you into the police force?
Born and raised St. John's, Newfoundland. I'm still very much a very proud Newfoundlander, and I spend still a fair amount of time home with my family. I'm the youngest of 11 children, and I'm often asked the question why I decided to join the RCMP. Because back in 1988, a woman joining the police force was still viewed as a little offbeat. Women had only been able to allow to join the RCMP as of 1974. So us being in the force was only 14 years old. So it was still a little bit of a novelty. So when I made my big announcement that I'm joining the RCMP, I think every member of my family kind of looked at me sideways and was like, where is this coming from? And I wish I had a more glamorous answer to that. But the reality is I have no idea.
Did you know anybody in the RCMP?
You know what? I didn't. I had no interactions. The Newfoundland St. John's is policed by the RNC, Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. And I had also applied to them at the same time. So both applications were being processed at the same time. The RCMP was definitely my choice for two reasons. One, I didn't want to stay in Newfoundland. Not that there was anything wrong with Newfoundland. I'm back there all the time. But I really wanted to travel. So I was very interested in international policing, even as a very young girl. And the second piece was I really wanted to police in the North. I had a huge passion for Arctic living. I was drawn to the RCMP for those two reasons. Like, it's not like I had an interaction with the RCMP and they kind of saved the day or anything of the sort. I was always drawn to policing. When I did a little bit of research, it was the RCMP that kind of pulled out.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Where was your first station?
When I graduated from Depot, I was stationed in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. And I policed there for 2.5 years. And then I was transferred to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, where I happened to have the pleasure of meeting you and your family. From there, I was transferred to the Eastern Arctic for 6 years. So
Tell me about that.
Gosh, that was an amazing experience. From the time I joined the force, I always wanted to do northern policing. It was just a passion of mine. I had researched the Arctic a little bit, knew it was tougher policing, knew it was going to be tougher for women as well. It was something that I always wanted to do.
At this point, you had children as well. So
I did.
As a family, you moved.
We did. Yeah. So in 2000, an opportunity opened up for me to transfer to Iqaluit. And at that time, as you said, my daughter was 2, my son was 4. The invite came sudden. I didn't know I was going to be offered it. I just got a call one day and they said, hey, what are your thoughts of transferring to Iqaluit, Nunavut? Because a lot of my coworkers knew I was very passionate about northern policing. When I got the call, I went, man, I got to think about this. Like, as crazy as my life was working shift work and having a 2 and a 4-year-old, this opportunity felt really right at this particular time. So Nunavut was a new territory at the time, and stepped back, did a little bit of research, checked out what family life was like, checked out what quality of life my children would have, schooling, all that jazz. The call came, I think, mid-July, and I was living in Nunavut, September 22nd, 2000.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was like nothing impulsive about me at all, is there?
You decided to stay on longer, didn't you?
I went for a 4-year commitment, and I absolutely loved my time in the Arctic. I'm an adamant believer that actions always speak louder than words. I went for 4 and stayed for 6. And really, the reason I came out at that point in time is my son was 10. He was entering middle school. I knew I wasn't going to spend my life in the Arctic. I have a very strong family root in Newfoundland. I love Nova Scotia. I knew I was not going to be there for the rest of my life. So I wanted to transition my kids out so they could settle back into middle school before they got too old, adapt quickly back to Southern living and all that jazz. When he hit 10, it was just, as a family, it was the right time to come out. Not that anything was wrong with living in the North. I absolutely loved it. And I truly thought that my career would bring me back there later in my service. That didn't happen. Iqaluit is still there, and I'm not beyond going back there again.
Wow. Maybe that will be one of our trips.
Yeah, absolutely.
What were some of the challenges that Iqaluit brought? Because it's a totally different culture. It's a different world there, isn't it?
It was. And again, 2000s, females in policing are still relatively new. So you're entering a new culture, new language, and you're walking into some situations where sometimes females weren't always well received. So that was definitely one of them. As soon as you started to talk to people and they understood that you weren't there to dominate them, you were just there, like they were having a bad day, you're just there to help them get through. And once you were able to really relay that message to them, those barriers dropped pretty quickly. I adopted to the Northern lifestyle very much. Like, I was involved in a lot of community programs up there. My kids were enrolled in community programs. The division of me being kind of a white woman of policing in the North, those barriers dropped pretty quick. Like, some of my closest friends, and they still are today, are from the North. Like, my daughters, some of their closest friends were Inuit, and we truly became community members up there. Policing in the North is tough. There's no mistake about it. During my career, it was perhaps some of the toughest policing that I've done. Sometimes you're working with shortages if people were sick. Like, you don't have an abundance of resources up there. So you were being the psychologist, the social worker, the probation officer, the nurse at times. Sometimes it was difficult to get supplies in for the detachment if something needed to be fixed. We were kind of like, okay, who's got a background in this? Let's try to get this fixed on our own. Some people may call them challenges. I call them memories, right? Like, those were what the good times were made of.
Of course.
And I always giggle. My daughter, when we left, she was 6 years old. And I said, she could handle the skidoo better than most men I knew. Because they were living the true blue Inuit lifestyle. So it was good. It was fun.
Wow. And that's a personal challenge, just the supplies aspect for your personal living, like in your home. So just to get supplies, you can't just pop out to your local store.
Well, there's a double answer to this. Sometimes you can, but the prices were exorbitant because everything in the north is so much more expensive in the south. So sometimes you could, but it was way more expensive. But other times they just were not available. To me, that's another benefit that I took from the north. I really kind of settled in. I learned a lot about myself in terms of, I could tell you how much toilet paper my family needed for a year. And the reason that was important is because every spring we did a sea lift, which meant that we came down probably January, February. We would buy all of our supplies for a year. So all your toilet paper, paper towels, your laundry detergent. If you can imagine everything your house would need for a year. And if that year you decide to buy a new couch, well, that came up on the sea lift as well. You would buy it, and then in the spring, when the ice would thaw out of the Arctic, it would come up on a sea lift container. So we've all seen those big containers. Some places now they're being transformed into little homes.
Yeah.
Where all of your supplies would be shipped up on a sea lift container, and you have to go pick it all up, and the whole family brings it up. We had a sea lift room, which looked like a little store, which, by the way, is not really good if you decide you eat 24 bags of chips in a year. It's not good to have 24 bags of chips in your sea lift room because they seem to go first, right?
Must have been like Christmas Day when that would arrive.
Oh my God, absolutely. It'd be like going to the store. The kids would come home from school and I run up to the sea lift room to see what they were going to eat. The other piece of that is you start to learn to recycle. And I became so conscious of Mother Earth because even during my time in the Arctic, the very first year that the sea lift boat came in, I remember it having to be preceded by an icebreaker because the Frobisher Bay was all still frozen. Well, by the time I left in my 6th year, we didn't need icebreakers anymore. The ice was all gone way before. I recycle absolutely everything I can. I try to live as a minimalist because there's so much crap in our worlds that we just don't need that I've tried my best to hang on to that.
What's your word you use?
It's all
you can say that word, yeah.
Okay, it's all fuckery. You don't need any of it. So live slim, keep your life simple. You don't need all that shit. And I'm way more gentler with Mother Earth than what I ever was before I went north. So I'm really proud of that attribute that I took away.
It's a great story, actually. Moving around with your family, how do you think that affected your kids' relationships in school and just constant change it must have felt like for them growing up?
Hey, true. So that's a great question. And it's actually one of the pieces that I often offer to my colleagues, advice and guidance of times gone by. In all honesty, they're probably be the best ones to ask of them. But from a mother's perspective, their lifestyle was one of my big decisions that I made. I stayed in the Arctic an extra 2 years. So when I came out, my son was 10, daughter was 6, and I was transferred to the Halifax area. And I took jobs based on them so they wouldn't have to be pulled from their nucleus. So although they were moved when they were younger, I left to Yarmouth. My daughter was 2, son was 4. I left to Iqaluit. They were 8 and 10 respectively, but we didn't move since then. I think they did okay, mainly because during their formative years, we were only in one place in Iqaluit, which was very family oriented. We did tons of things as a family. Like that was a good news story. And then once we came back down, we just had the one house and we stayed put. Then I traveled a little bit so that they didn't have to be disrupted.
You were in small towns.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the difference between being a police officer in a small town and being a police officer in a city area?
Well, based on my experience, like I said, I policed Antigonish, I policed Yarmouth County. So that included all your small communities, Wedgeport, East Pubnico, Quinn, and the full meal deal. Iqaluit, very small town. When we were there, it was only 6,500. And then boom, I landed back into HRM. From my experience, when I policed in small communities, you were absolutely everything, as I've said earlier. You were oftentimes your probation officer. You were your social services worker. Sometimes you were liaisoning at the hospital, doing med transports, whatever needed to be done, you got done. When I transferred back here to Halifax, I initially started working with the integrated team with Halifax Regional Police. So the biggest difference there is that they have specialized units for specialized events. So they have an integrated homicide team, robbery, auto thefts, child exploitation, whatever it is, there's an integrated team. So you get a lot more specialists. At times, you may only be limited to one particular area of policing at a time, which is your only responsibility. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's bad. Policing small, you get a wide swath. You're responsible for all your court briefs. You're responsible for, bringing people to court, doing your prisoner transports. That's amazing experience. Whereas in larger areas, there's specialized teams that take care of those specific duties.
What are the challenges of being a police officer in a small town?
I don't know if it's so much challenges or growth opportunities or just general differences. What I would say is oftentimes with small towns, you spend a lot of time on call, so that depending on the size of the community, there may not be 24-hour policing, so that on your days off, you're still on call, which can have a very eroding effect because you never get just to tap out and be a mom or just to have a few drinks and not worry about the phone going off. Anything from you're at your daughter's basketball game that you're walking out, or it's a Friday night and you got to go to bed at 10:30 because you know that the phone's going to ring in the morning. The other thing I found is that sometimes in a small town, you never ever got to take off your uniform. And what I mean by that is even when you're at the grocery store, if you're at the basketball game with your daughter, you're still the female cop. At times, admittedly, I did find that challenging because sometimes I just wanted to be a mom. I didn't want someone unloading at the basketball game about whatever was going on with their son or their daughter or the accident that they just had or the unfair ticket that they just got. I just want to sit there and watch my daughter play basketball.
Of course.
That definitely was a challenge, sometimes not being able to switch off.
Would you say that you're able to switch off between a police brain and a civilian brain?
Absolutely.
In like your personal life?
Absolutely. If you don't, you're going to find yourself in hot water. Again, any young police officer coming into the policing world, that would be one little piece of advice that I would give them. You better learn to do that early, because if you don't, you're going to find yourself in hot water. The human soul is not meant to see the amount of tragedy, sorrow, violence that we see. And so I always say for every little drop of bad, you got to have like 10 drops of good. So whatever that release is, when you're off duty, go out and chop wood, go to the gym, go play hopscotch with your kids, whatever it is. But if you don't do that, then I think that's where a lot of our mental health injuries are coming from, is that either members are not getting allowed to have the downtime that they require, or when they do get it, they haven't learned to fully take off the uniform and just be a son, daughter, mother, father, whatever your role is, right? Girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever your role is, just be a civilian.
Yeah.
Don't be responsible for the world. Just from personal experience, like I know what we do is brutal. It's brutal on the head. It's brutal on the soul. And again, as I say, we're not meant to see that kind of trauma. We're not meant to be left under that amount of pressure sometimes for the amount of time that we are. Anyone who's been doing this business any amount of time is suffering from probably some form of an operational stress injury. Doesn't necessarily need to be PTSD. The other good thing is that we speak we're open about it now. So we recognize the triggers as supervisors. I watch my members to see like, okay, you're off your game. What's going on here, bud? Like, this is not you. This is not how you speak to the public normally. You just lost your shit and this situation didn't warrant it. So talk to me about what's going on. As supervisors, we're more plugged in as to what's going on and looking for the signs and symptoms as well. And I think there's still work to be done, but we're definitely taking the stigma away from it and encouraging people to reach out more and more.
I think mental health is a hot topic at the moment. A lot of people are feeling much more comfortable to speak about it.
Mm-hmm. Like policing, obviously, people in the military policing, a lot of members have been diagnosed with PTSD and or operational stress injury, anxiety, depression, whatever it is. The pressure that nurses and doctors are under, my God, ER nurses and doctors, paramedics, firefighters, like you're seeing shit we're not supposed to see. You can understand why they would need help. And I'm glad that the tide has changed, to be honest.
Yeah. And you definitely do more times than you would like to admit. You bring that home. And so you just have to find that switch.
Yep. And put it in its place and just say, you know what, I'm just a mom today. Like sometimes I can't save the world. It's just me.
How do you deal with incidents that cause you to lose your coworkers in the line of duty?
Oh boy, you're just going right for the jugular, aren't you? Well, sometimes I'm not sure I have yet. Thanks, Kevjet. I gotta pull it together. On some levels, I think I still have some processing to do. Unfortunately, I have lost some. I'll answer it. I think it is an important question to ask.
And it's going to happen to people that will be listening as well, if it hasn't happened to them already.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. All right, let's try this again. Unfortunately, during my service, I have lost a number of coworkers to in-service deaths, which means responding to calls, and they've been murdered. I've had members who have died in motor vehicle collisions, and I've had a number of members who have committed suicide. Some levels, I think that's all still being processed. And again, part and parcels, I always reach out for mental health. Like when I go through that, my psychologist is the first person I'll call. Each one you take a step at a time because each one is a story within itself. I mean, I worked with Heidi when she was murdered. That one is still very raw. So it's hard, but just like I would tell any member, you take it all and you process it a step at a time and make sure you reach out for support.
Again, mental health, it's such a hot topic, and it's one that is encouraged to be talked about. And I think we're headed in the right direction, definitely in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about some of the advantages in the police force that you're able to take. You're able to take lots of training. As you mentioned, there's different divisions. You've been able to take advantage of that a lot, as in, what did you say, 34 years of the police?
4 years of policing.
And you've actually moved on to teaching yourself. So let's rewind and go back to some of the training that you've had. What was your most interesting ones?
Boy, that's a tough question because I've had some amazing opportunities for training within the RCMP. Where do I even start? I'll go right back. Even to make it through the 6 months at Depot was like such a personal achievement. It's amazing because it is so intense, so busy. And I equate it to drinking from a fire hose because there's so much information coming from you. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, if I made it through that, I got this. I'm going to be okay, But during my service, like even over and above your basic training, of course, I've had the opportunity to do some great interviewing techniques and so on and so forth. I would have to say one of my favorite courses when I was in the Arctic, I was trained as a crisis negotiator. So you're a hostage negotiator. Just the information and the skill set gained from that has helped me in every aspect of my life. I think every person in this world need to be trained hostage negotiator because, with people, if you deal with people, you're going to end up in conflict. That's just the way it goes. But, learning to slow down, see a situation through another person's eyes and being able to understand what they're going through and try to help them see the way clear to get out of a tough situation is a gift, like learning how to do that skilled. So I have to say my training as a crisis negotiator is probably one of my favorite and one of my most useful in all aspects of life. But as well, at the end of my service in 2019, I ended up deployed to Ukraine. While in Ukraine, I was working with their frontline police officers, and there was a number of things that we were teaching while we were over there. We were teaching everything from like domestic investigations, community policing, leadership. But one of the main teams I was on was critical incident de-escalation. So same thing, we were teaching their frontline police officers how to de-escalate a hostile personality without using your fists, your guns, your baton, like just how to talk a person off the proverbial edge.
Were you shocked by the difference in policing?
What I would say, I was happy that I entered Ukraine at the time that I did because it was an evolving and it was a police force that was transforming itself. I was really glad to be in on the front line because we were able to install various policing values and to teach, you police your community by consent. You don't come in and dominate. You understand what your community's needs are. Then you elaborate on those and you try to, engage your community in problem solving. That was a brand new concept for a lot of the police officers we were working for because that's not how they were trained. So as a country, they were transforming their police force into being a transparent and an ethical police force. And it was exciting to be involved in that because we were teaching some skills that were very relevant to that and skills that were necessary for frontline police officers that they hadn't been exposed to. So although I may have thought it to be basic and dated today, it was revolutionary for a lot of their frontline police officers. It changed literally the way they policed. That may have all gone in the toilet in the last 2 years. It was an amazing opportunity to be there.
And so you didn't get to finish your mission.
It's a little bit of an omen on me, I think. I was deployed in July 2019. I was supposed to be there till July 2020. We ended up getting evac'd out in March due to COVID. I ended up getting evac'd out, came back to COVID, and I was in quarantine here in my house when Portapique happened here in Nova Scotia.
I was just going to mention that, which was your detachment, wasn't it?
That was my detachment before I was deployed overseas. That was a nightmare. So I was in quarantine just home when Portapique was ongoing, and I felt like a trapped rat in a cage, right? You just couldn't get out to help. So we all know the outcome of Portapique.
Just to explain, just to the people here in England, you don't have to go into detail, but just give a very brief description of what that is.
Yeah. So Portapique refers to a mass shooting that we had here in Nova Scotia in April of 2020. When a gunman went around and basically slaughtered 22 Nova Scotians, of which was Heidi Stevenson, my coworker.
Yeah. And you were at home in quarantine.
I was at home in quarantine.
Mm-hmm. So that was not a great time. And you had been just taken out of your mission, which you loved.
Yep. What happened was I was in quarantine. Portapique happened. I was stuck in quarantine. 5 days after Portapique happened, I got a note saying that H Division RCMP were pulling me from the mission. So they weren't allowing me to return to Ukraine. We had a lot of members off sick from Portapique. They needed as much support, and as well as senior police officers working frontline as necessary. It was a business decision. Totally get it. It was just sucked for me. I went back to work here in Nova Scotia at Lower Sackville, so that was all good. Then in 21, I received permission to be redeployed overseas. Went through the screening process in 21, and I was scheduled to be redeployed to Ukraine in March of 22 when the war broke out in February of 22. So the stars just didn't line up for me to go back, unfortunately.
It's time to retire.
It's time to retire. Yeah, someone was sending me a message for sure. So retirement then happened in October of 22, and I went back as a reservist in November of 22.
And if you look at it in one way, it's kind of navigated you into all the right places at the right time, because you missed all the sort of events that you could have been involved in, some horrible events.
Absolutely. And I'm a firm believer. You're in a place at the right time. Karma takes care of you. The universe got a plan for you. So sometimes just get out of its way. I wasn't meant to be back there. And, so be it. I'm still in touch with a lot of my coworkers who are from Ukraine, who are still there. So I still have a pretty intimate portrayal as to what's going on. But for whatever reason, the universe decided I wasn't to be back there at this particular time. Kind of just got to let that shit go and be where you're supposed to be. Exactly. And right now it's here with my family and friends. So you lean into that.
Wonderful. If somebody tells you they're interested in joining the police force, how would that conversation unfold with you?
That's actually a really good question. Because first of all, I don't think everyone's meant to be a police officer. It takes a special kind of person to be able to survive in that business. So my first advice would be you need a lot of emotional and mental wherewithal to survive in this business. So I always say my advice to anyone who's considering joining, you may want to wait till you're 24, 25, 26 to have at least a little bit of life experience on your belt before you take on these jobs, because they're huge responsibilities. I know policing right now in the media in the world, because of some behavior by some police officers in some countries, it most definitely has taken on a negative aspect. One of the things I admire the RCMP for is they are a police force that is very engaged with their community. And I find by far and large, we still have community support. Like when we're out on the road on the front line, we do still have the community support. And people are glad, we're the first persons they're calling when things go for shit, because nobody calls the RCMP when everything's going well. They only call for police and for backup when something is falling apart in the world and they need a hand. So you need to, to have the ability to walk in. You need to have the ability to deal with a person who's in crisis and make them confident that you have the skill set, the want, and the ability to help get them out of the crises they're in. People never ever call the police and say, hey, things are going good. Do you want to come over for a cup of tea? I've never gotten those calls in the 34 years that I've been policing. Go figure. I would say have some life experience under your belt. You can't go in with this chip on your shoulder of, I'm the police and you're going to do what I got to say. You got to go in, you got to say, let me see this through your eyes. What's happening here today? How can we get through it together as a team? And then you got to be willing to help people problem solve. And if you don't have that in you innately, boy, it's a tough profession to survive in if you don't have the problem to help people out of tight spots. Because really, that's what you're doing.
What do you say to people who are anti-police? How do you win them over?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Join us each week on the Well Beyond Medicine podcast as we explore the 80% of child health impacts that occur outside the doctor's office. Listen and subscribe at nemorswellbeyond.org, where you'll hear pediatric experts, researchers, and policymakers from around the world discussing ways they are revolutionizing children's health. I'm your host, Carol Vassar. Let's go.
Let's go. Well beyond medicine.
Well, I'm always very cautious as to where I invest my energy because some people you're not capable of winning them over. But the first thing I would like to see is what's going on through their eyes. Like, why is it that there's this adversarial disposition between them and the police? Maybe they've had a really bad interaction in their past. Maybe it's warranted. Maybe they weren't treated very well at some point in time. So the first thing I'd like to do is I would like to do is try to understand their perspective as to what the issue is. And then, at the end of the day, try to breed confidence that even though you may not like me and we're going to have to do business here, regardless, I will treat them with kindness and respect and dignity. Like this isn't a me against them. I'm dealing with some people who are having a really shitty day. And if I deal with them next week when they're out of this crisis, they're a totally different person. So I don't take it personal. They aren't mad and angry and hateful at Brigdit Leger. They're mad at an institution that's coming in and saying, you can't do that. And I'm going to be the one to stop you from doing it. And when people are in crises and they got someone in their face saying, you got to change your behavior, buddy. Let's try to do this together. But if you don't, at the end of the day, your behavior is going to be changed. So let's try to do this gracefully, right? So some people just don't like receiving that message. And you try to give it with kindness and respect and to make them understand this isn't about me. This isn't about you. This is about me just trying to keep everybody safe.
Good answer.
Maybe a year or two.
Who is the biggest VIP you've ever had to protect?
I think that would be my mother, but that's all a matter of perspective, right?
That's a very good answer.
I think she is like the most important person in the world. Yeah. The person who I perhaps have the most respect for. But if you're looking at the rest of society, of course, Lizzie and I are old friends. I had the opportunity to work a VIP detail with Queen Elizabeth when she was visiting Nova Scotia. So that was actually pretty impressive. She's a pretty impressive lady. She was a pretty impressive lady. That was a pretty amazing detail. And of course, for 3 years, I was a media spokesperson for the RCMP. So during that time, whenever VIPs ended up coming into Nova Scotia, I had to work closely with our media. Through that, a number of presidents, there's a number of prime ministers I worked very closely with. But I got to say, there's something shiny about Queen Elizabeth. She really did steal my heart. And it was a pleasure to be able to work closely with her. I was just kind of walking a red carpet with her.
Let's talk about the red carpet because it sounds very glamorous, but it wasn't glamorous at all, was it?
No, not at all. Again, it was just during one of her visits to Nova Scotia, and I was working as the media relations officer for Nova Scotia RCMP at the time. So with that, I had to work hand in glove with the local media so that they can have access in scrums and so on and so forth. And in this particular event, we were down, I think it was Pier 21, and I literally I don't even know how it happened. At the last minute, they needed someone to walk the red carpet with her. I was fully armed because, of course, when we do these events, we are still police officers and we all are still responsible for the Queen. And because I was media trained as well, they decided that for whatever reason, I was the one that needed to walk the red carpet with Queen Elizabeth. to protect her from the media? I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, it was really fun. It was quite an experience because I wasn't prepared. Of course, I look like you're 300 pounds with all your clothes on. I was like, no one told me I was walking a red carpet in the front of international cameras. And yet here I am walking alongside Queen Elizabeth, keeping her safe and keeping the media away. I wasn't really sure what it was about, but it was a lot of fun. So it was very interesting. And like I say, it's probably is one of my fondest memories in the force is walking the red carpet with Queen Elizabeth.
Did you have to follow any royal protocol?
Well, I didn't because it happened all very sudden, by which they realized there was going to be a number of media in very close proximity to her and they needed an armed person. So it was kind of one of those, seriously, they're like, off with your jacket, you're on the red carpet. And I was like, no, I'm responsible for the media. I'm very much a behind the scenes girl. Keep me behind the scenes. I'm okay. They're like, no, you're on the red carpet. Go now, jacket off, go. And I was like, I didn't see this one coming today. Here we go. So, but it was a lot of fun and it's a super fun memory. So, just to get to spend that time so close to her, it was fun.
The rest of the world looks at RCMP officers and they see a person on a horse in the red uniform.
A red serge. Well, that is our formal uniform. And before you can get it, there's a lot of work you have to do. So for anyone who's wearing it, I really hope they wear it with pride and dignity for the work that it took to earn it. And it definitely is a staple and it definitely is a trademark of Canada. When you put it on for Remembrance Day or Canada Day, it is a very proud moment because people recognize what you are. They recognize what you represent to Canadians. And I love being at the Legions on Remembrance Day and sitting down with your World War II veterans and just chatting. You hear the same stories year after year, and I absolutely love it.
I thought you were going somewhere else when you said you loved being at the Legions.
Well, there is those stories too. But in this case, I'm talking about sitting down talking to my World War II veterans, which I loved doing. It was great. They always had the same stories, and they told them every year like it was the first time they were telling you.
And it's quite sad that we're losing all our veterans now.
One of my favorites just passed away about a year and a half ago. He was out in Enfield, and I was heartbroken when I passed.
Let's go back to your days of a negotiator. I would imagine you could be called at any time, any day. It doesn't have to be your working day.
No, not at all. We would have a go bag pack, and a go bag literally was a suitcase with all of our kit and everything that was ready, because especially I was trained when I was in the Arctic and our resources are so thin there. So if we had any armed or barricaded person anywhere in Nunavut, we would be jumping on the plane and going to it. So we literally had a go bag packed at all times. There was no kind of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. That was literally, you could be anywhere and be ready to jump on the plane in a minute.
And you have no idea what you're walking into, do you?
I don't know. Well, generally speaking, if they're calling out the ERT team, because the crisis negotiator always works hand in glove with the ERT team, generally speaking, I'm dealing with someone who's barricaded. And usually it's just a matter of whether or not there's already been a homicide or death, or we're going to do our best to prevent one. Because generally speaking, that's what we were called out for. Someone maybe who's suicidal, those type of things. You always had your go bag ready, and you always kind of had to be a little bit switched on, which is part and parcel of, again, what I go back to earlier. It's really important to try and steal those moments when you're not responsible, when you can take the uniform off, because sometimes in small town policing, you weren't always afforded those opportunities.
In those situations, they're not always successful. So how do you walk away from that, not blaming yourself?
Yeah, and that's all part of the training we do. We do a lot of scenario-based training. So, there are coping and managing strategies for that. And I mean, there's not a lot that I can really get into here on the air. And I certainly don't want to try to give everybody a crisis negotiator course in an hour, but we do have coping mechanisms, straight and training mechanisms for that. And sometimes though, it's just like when in service death, when I lose one of my coworkers at a call who was shot to death or ran over by a car or committed suicide. You got to process that stuff, because you cannot leave it unaddressed, or else it'll come back and bite you in the ass. But
yeah,
just get on and address it.
What would you say to somebody who is in the police force at this time and says, that's something that I'd really like to get into, and maybe you might not think that they're not ready for it at this time? What's that conversation like?
Well, to be a crisis negotiator, and I truly believe there are skill sets that I learned as a crisis negotiator that I think every person in this world needs to take. I'll digress a little bit for a second here, but my daughter was working in a local coffee shop, and this older gentleman came in and absolutely lost his shit on her because he had bought chili there and the chili was cold and he was bringing it back and wanted a refund, and he was absolutely going crazy on her. And I looked at her and I said, well, how did you process that? She said, well, I just kind of looked at him and I thought, I wonder what's going on in his day that he's got to scream and yell at a 16-year-old girl working in a coffee shop. And very well done. And she said, you know what was funniest, Mom? And I said, what? She said, we don't even serve chili. Like, we didn't even buy it here. I don't know why he was yelling at me. We don't even have chili. So you couldn't help but to laugh. But I was really glad to see that her first aspect is, this isn't about me. This is about him. And I wonder what's going on in his world. And I wish more people could take that lesson, because they'd say, why, if I'm driving down the roadway and someone's blowing their horn or screaming or yelling at me, maybe this isn't about me. Maybe this is about them. And rather than giving them the finger or getting up in their face saying, what the fuck is wrong with you? Maybe you just got to step back and say, they need to get in. They need to cut in and let them go. Maybe their kid's sick and they're trying to get to the hospital. Stop making it all about you. Just catch your breath and not be up in someone else's face right away. What would I say to a person who wanted to become a crisis negotiator? I think it's one of the best courses in the force. I think, again, you need to learn to listen to people, because I think as a society, we don't necessarily do that well. We hear people, but we don't listen. Because sometimes if you learn to listen effectively, the words that are coming out of a person's mouth are just one thing. But you got to look at the feeling and the emotion and the physical ability that are being attached to those, because you can read a whole lot more from a person's nonverbal communication versus just the words that are coming out of their mouth. And once you learn to master that, sometimes watching a person, what they're saying, says a whole lot more than the spoken words that are coming out of their lips.
What will you miss the most about being a police officer?
One side of me says nothing, because I feel like I've done my years and it's time to catch my breath and put my feet up. Inevitably, even my job before I joined the force, I was a lifeguard. So I've always been kind of tend towards like that first aid, first responder, lifeguard. I was teaching first aid. So I've always kind of had that streak in me. Some people run to the flames. Some people run away from it when shit's happen. For whatever reason, if you're the type that runs to the flame, oftentimes you'll end up as a firefighter, police officer, first responder. I think it would probably just be the daily interaction of people. I find people incredibly intriguing. And again, it's always like I say, I go back to, they may say one thing, but what they're saying is not what they mean. So trying to listen to what they're saying and then watch the tone, context that they're speaking, their physical cues, their nonverbal communication through their body cues and stuff, trying to say, this is a really sensitive point. Yeah, they're saying they're okay, they're not okay. Like kind of that little bit of the mind game that you play with people. So I do find that, although I got to admit, I do that a little bit in my personal life too. It does carry over. But that would probably be it. Just the interaction with my coworkers are amazing, the esprit de corps. And generally just kind of helping people out, I think, would probably be what I miss most. Not that just won't continue in a different aspect. But
what does retirement look like to you and your brain?
The retirement in my brain looks like the world. I've never been the type that decided, like I could never ever see myself sitting home knitting and planting a garden. It's just not me. My retirement will include a lot of travel. And that's already started thanks to just the way things that have lined up over the past year. I've been able to do some amazing trips. As I said, when I joined the force, one of the deciding factors for me to join the RCMP versus the RNC was the fact that the RCMP had international deployments. So even as a very young girl, I've always been intrigued by travel, different culture, different places, understanding how people live, languages. So I foresee that in my retirement, there will be more of that. Or at least that's what I'm hoping. If all goes well. Are you free for the next 25 years to travel?
Yeah, I'm free. I'm there. I've got my passport out already.
Perfect. And I love vagabond traveling. It doesn't have to be big fancy trips. I love throwing a backpack on my back, sometimes going and making it up as we go along. Because the last trip I was just on, there was 1 week there. I had no idea where I was going to end up. Kind of just wung it, as you know.
As I know. And it was great.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah.
Who's your role model?
Boy, it's a good question. And I have a bunch of different aspects of my life because I have role models for different aspects. If I were to say carte blanche, again, it would have to be my mother, mainly because she had 11 kids, of which I'm the youngest. But when you have 11 kids, you're like, whatever, it just is. But then I had two. And I was like totally overwhelmed, like trying to figure out how to raise and mold these amazing human beings. And I'm thinking, she did this 11 times over. Like either she was fried or amazing. So maybe I still don't have that answer yet, to be honest with you. But I really respect my brothers and sisters. And I think my mom did a great job. So I really do have a lot of respect for her and what she managed to do during her life here on earth. She's a pretty amazing woman.
So moving around with your children to different parts of Canada, just because you're in the same country doesn't mean that you're not going to be exposed to different cultures. Tell me a story about the kids learning different cultures and experiencing different ways of life, and maybe even being the brunt of a bit of racism.
Yeah, I know what you're referring to there. Yeah. So it is, of course, we moved to the Arctic and, white family. My son is blonde hair, blue eyed. So I remember him coming home from school one day and he kind of walked in. I could tell he was off his game a little bit. And I said, "What's going on, bud?" And he went on to share that while he was on the school, he was being teased because he was the white kid. And in addition to being white, he was attending the French school. So it was decided that he was going to be called French fries. He was the French fry. And he came in and he couldn't go. He goes, "Mom, like, they're all kind of picking on me and they're saying I'm the French fry." And I kind of smiled. And I said, "Yeah, how did that make you feel?" And he goes, "Not very good. Like, I didn't like it at all." And I said, "And Zach, that's called racism." So I said, "I want you to remember as you go through life, that's what racism is. And I want you to remember how it feels. And one thing I want you to be absolutely sure of is that you never, ever make anybody else feel this way. Just because someone's different and in our country, you treat them with the same kindness and respect that you treat everybody else. So don't ever, please, whatever you do, don't ever forget this feeling." And, I think it resonated with him because we've talked about it a few times later. And another incident that I giggle at, and it's, the old saying, right? Kids just got to be kids. I remember my daughter coming home from school one day and she walked in to the room and she said, for the purposes of the story, I'm going to use the name Mary. And she came in and she said, "Mom, the kids are saying Mary's Inuit." And I smiled at her and I said, "Emily, Mary is Inuit." And she went, "No, she isn't." I said, "Emily, yes, she is." I said, "Just stop." And I could see Em stopping and kind of pitching Mary in her head. And like, as a child, this was just her best friend. She had never ever noticed she was Inuit. And I just thought, what a life lesson. Like, these are just two kids playing together. One never noticed the other's white. The other never noticed the other was Inuit. They were just two kids playing. I said in life, like, we need to learn to play more like children because we're just people existing, having a good time together, right? Play like kids. And it's just, I often speak of that and remind her. And, we talk about our experiences up north. And it was two really valuable lessons that I take from them. And I'll never let the kids forget about it.
They've had great learning experiences, just life experiences.
Yeah, I've been blessed just through those teachable moments, right? Where you're just a person. No one's different. You're just a person.